Welcome back to the Metal Exchange. Justin and Chris back again. It is the first episode of the month. It is request week here at the Metal Exchange. This week we go back to 1998 and cover the third album by Diabolical Masquerade, their Nightwork release. Nothing Chris loves more than some Swedish black metal, I've come to learn over the years, so I'm curious to talk about this one. But before we talk about all things Diabolical Masquerade, how are you, my friend?
Very good, very good. It's the prior week that I had was just crazy before our last episode, and this past week was like way more mellow on all fronts. So I feel a lot more energized and less beaten down by life, to put it frankly, this time around.
I wish I could say the same. This has been a rough one for me, but I did have some music to get me through. Diabolical Masquerade being part of it, but two albums in particular, relatively new releases that have jumped out, and I'm glad that I got to listen to one of them a few times, and the other one I only listened to once, but I will be going back to it. The first album, which I don't know if I even realized that this was coming out, to be completely honest with you, but a band that we covered in the archives, Frost, released their new album, Life in the Wires. It's a 2 CD set, if you will, 14 tracks in all. This was a pleasant surprise. Not that I didn't like the last album that we covered. I obviously enjoyed that, but I thought the new album was really good. And one of the better prog metal albums that I've heard this year that was just chock full of melody and some really good songwriting. I know this was something that was on your radar. Curious if you had a chance to give it a listen, or if you have not quite circled around to it yet.
Not quite circled around to it yet, but it is very close to being listened to on my list of things, as I finally cracked into Q4, and so I am maybe like about 2 or 3 weeks behind. So it's definitely on my list along with a bunch of other stuff. But yes, I do fully plan on giving that a listen, amongst other things. But yeah.
It clocks in at nearly 90 minutes, but it didn't feel like a daunting listen. It was just, like I said, chock full of melodies, good songwriting, and something that, quite frankly, I'll go back to again just because I enjoyed it as much as I did. And
I listened to one of the singles during the week, and I liked it. So I look forward to listening to the rest of it.
I think that bodes well. If you enjoyed the single, I would imagine you're going to enjoy the full-length release. And then in the polar opposite vein, let's go to Portugal and listen to some, I guess, other black metal, although admittedly, I don't even know if I would consider them black metal. They kind of touch on a lot of genres. It's a band I've talked about in the past. It's Gaerea, Gaerea. Their new album, Coma, came out, and this is getting rave reviews from a lot of people. I don't know if I enjoyed it as much as I did their prior release, Mirage, which came out 2 years ago. That was a real banger of an album. This is really good as well. I've only given it one listen, but really heavy, but they don't forget the melody, which to me is critical when you're talking about heavy music. It just can't be heavy for noise's sake. My issue with the album, and it might be a me thing, I thought the production was a little tinny on this, but I know that I've spoken to some other folks who did not feel the same way. So it could just be the earbuds that I was using or whatnot. I'm going to actually listen to it in the car this weekend just to see if it was a me thing or if something was going on with my earbuds. But really, really great band, a band that has done some tours of the U.S. I have not gotten to see them live. I'm still crossing my fingers that they get announced for 70,000 tons because they would fit in like a glove there. Have you ever heard anything from these guys?
Yeah, I think weren't they one of the bands the first time we did a Name 3 Songs bonus episode?
I might have forced you to listen. That's entirely possible. Again, very, very heavy, very brutal, but at the same time, retains that melody. They kind of cross-pollinate genres. But the new album is quite good, and I think it's worth a listen for many.
Did you know that they are Rick Martel's favorite band because he was a big fan of teaming with Tony Garea? So
that's right. And you know, the Portugal-French connection it remains strong, so it all makes sense. But that's what I've been listening to this week. I just started listening to the new Devin Townsend. I have not had a chance to finish it yet, so haven't really formed an opinion on that. Curious, what caught your ear?
I, of all things, was very much blown away by the new Offspring album, which
really,
I always grab their albums whenever they come out with one, and you know, in the later years they're fewer and further between. But I haven't really loved much of what they've put out in. It's probably since like the last like 12 or 13 years, I would even say. But this new album, hold on, I'm just adding something to. I wanted to add the Devin Townsend album to the to-do list. The album's called Supercharged. It came out a couple of weeks ago, and I don't know, man. I don't know if it was just the mood I was in or what, but it really kind of took me back to like their late 90s, early 2000s material, and it was just a really like fun and enjoyable listen. So if you're in the mood for something a little lighter, a little more in the punk rock alternative world, this was a very pleasant surprise for me. So I recommend this one, and I don't know, it was so weird. I was like, why am I enjoying this so much?
How did it compare with the Green Day and Pearl Jam releases from this year? I would kind of lump them into the same broad category.
I honestly, I feel like all three bands have released their best album in a while. So it's 2024. I don't know, for whatever reason, at least for me, I will say Pearl Jam's latest is probably my favorite album they've done since probably before Backspacer, which came out in 2009. Green Day's newest album is probably my favorite album they've done since 21st Century Breakdown, which came out in, I think, also 2009, around that time. And this Offspring album is probably my favorite they've done in quite a while. I don't know where exactly I would place it. I've only listened to it once, but yeah, very, very, very pleasant surprise. And I will mention I finally got on board with the rest of the world and listened to the Cemetery Skyline album, and I was worried that it wasn't going to live up to the hype because everybody that's listened to it loves it. But it still managed to live up to the hype. Just a really fantastic album. Catchy songs, like hooks galore, and just like, Michael Stane's clean vocals are just really pleasant sounding. So I like this one a lot, and I think I'm going to be joining quite a few people with this album being kind of high on my list come the end of the year.
Yeah, man, I'm glad you liked it. Shout out to Sean the Metal Pigeon. I think the only person I know that didn't have the fondest of things to say, but I totally respect his opinion. He was obviously on the show recently, but as far as Cemetery Skyline goes, I feel like it was one of those albums that was just such an easy listen. It was something that, like, when I put it on, I just brings a smile on my face. I enjoy it for 45 minutes or whatever it is, and then I move on about my day. And I think that's happened like close to a half dozen times at this point. I just really enjoy not only the album itself, but listening to the album, if that makes sense. It's just a nice change of pace. I guess kind of like the Offspring was in many ways for you this week. But what else you got? I'm assuming you have one or two other things that might have caught your ear.
Yeah, something that I really was not expecting to care that much about, that ended up just being incredibly enjoyable for me, was the new Angra acoustic live album that they just released. And I haven't even finished listening to it yet, in all honesty, but I just enjoyed what I've heard so much so far. Especially getting to hear like Gentle Change, which was my song of the week when we covered Fireworks. And they do Holy Land and Reaching Horizons and Silence and Distance, along with some of like the newer material as well. And it's interesting because I'm looking at the album set list, and I'm not seeing Wuthering Heights on it. And I had shared a video on our Facebook group of Angra performing Wuthering Heights with Amanda Somerville doing those high notes that Matos did all those years ago, oh so beautifully. But I thought Amanda Somerville knocked that out of the park, and I guess I had assumed that was part of this live CD, but I guess not. I realized that it was like a number of shows during a tour, so it's possible that they didn't record the audio for that, but I think it was a pro shot video. So I recommend checking out the album anyway, and then going and watching that video when you're done, just to get everything out of the way. I think I liked it even more than the version they did with Tarja on the Angels Cry anniversary edition. So that was really good. I look forward to listening to the rest of it, but I mean, just the first like half of it or so, I was so just it was just so well done. The sound was just so good. Fabio sounds great. There's tracks that Raphael does the vocals for, and he has, I think, a really nice voice, totally different from Fabio's. I think it's a really nice counterpoint. I kind of wish they had released like a Blu-ray with this, because it would have been a no-brainer for me to purchase. I did put on my Amazon wish list earlier today the Blu-ray for the new Halloween live album that comes out in December, so I'm hoping to watch that. But it would have been nice. I'll just say that. I know like not a lot of bands are just releasing their stuff on DVD and Blu-ray anymore.
For some reason, it was like after the pandemic when everyone was just doing that, like behind without a studio, without an audience, they were just kind of releasing live stuff. It seems like it's died on the vine the last 3 or 4 years. Not entirely sure why, but I guess the market, maybe it's just the cost of production exceeds the revenue and whatnot. But yeah, I thought the Angra acoustic album was good. Obviously looking forward to the Halloween as well. I know we just got sent a promo for the audio, but for that's something I want to just sit down and watch and kind of relive that entire tour, which was nothing short of spectacular.
Yeah, same. I took a brief look at the set list, and it looks to be pretty much exactly what we had seen when we saw them in New York. The last thing I will mention is I was going to mention this last week, but there was just so much happening. I didn't get around to it, so I promised myself I would remember this time. I came across a pianist by the name of Lawrence Manning, and she's from, I believe, Montreal, Quebec. And I will double check that just to make sure I am correct there. But she released a bunch of video game piano cover albums, particularly one called Game Music Piano Album, which is kind of like some of the best, game songs, and Piano Collections Castlevania, which is just all tracks from the Castlevania soundtrack. And yes, she's from Montreal, Quebec. I just came across her on YouTube, and it was I just really enjoyed the piano renditions of these songs that I absolutely love. And she also released an album under the name of the Lawrence Manning Trio, which actually has a couple of string instruments, so it's not completely just piano music. And that is a compilation of Legend of Zelda songs that are done, with I believe it's a stand-up bass and a violinist and her on piano. So I enjoyed the hell out of this. If you're into video game music, these renditions are really, really good. So I would highly recommend check her out. She's got lots of really cool videos on YouTube, and all of her albums are also on Bandcamp. But I did want to mention that because I love I love game music, but when I find it done in a different way, I can't tell you how many metal cover band, video game versions of Bloody Tears I've heard over the years. And so it's cool to hear something. I've actually been listening to these albums first thing in the morning when I'm doing kind of some of my work that involves me to be a little bit more concentrated. It's just very chill and easy to listen to, rather than black metal while first thing in the morning while I'm trying to concentrate. So I definitely recommend checking her out. I think her stuff is great. And yeah, that's it. So yeah, I guess I made up for all of the stuff I have not been talking about the last few weeks.
Yeah, good recommendation there. The track or two you sent me by her was just a really well done rendition of those tunes. Obviously, she's quite the accomplished pianist, and the music lends itself to it. So thanks for the share. I'll make sure to post one of the tracks this week as well. And that brings us to the black metal, which is apparently you were listening to in the afternoon this week, because we know what you were listening to in the morning. Nightwork came out on September 21st, 1998. Diabolical Masquerade is a two-man project. It's produced and kind of put together by Dan Swano, the drummer, percussionist, keyboardist on the album. But the main musician is Blackheim, guitars, vocals, bass, and other keyboards. Quick metal trivia for you. Do you know who Blackheim is and where he's from without looking?
I'm already looking at his bio, so I'm not going to pretend like I know, but I did not know. You
would have been very, very impressed, or I would have been very impressed had you known this. But Blackheim goes by his real name, Anders Nystrom, and for those that know who he is, he's one of the guys that has been around Catatonia since their very, very early days. He did the Bloodbath project also with Dan Swano, which is more of a death metal project. Just an accomplished musician who, much like a lot of artists, I have to assume wanted some sort of another creative outlet to go in a different direction, because Diabolical Masquerade sounds nothing like even the early Catatonia stuff, which slanted more death metal. This is obviously more black metal, although there are some death metal elements to some of this stuff. And yeah, they came out with 4 albums in total. This was their 1998 release. 8 tracks clocking in at just about 40 minutes in length, and a lot of Z's all over the place on this one. And if you have no idea what I'm talking about, I will only say this once and once only, because I do not want to keep repeating myself. But every one of these tracks has a Z in it. Why? I have no idea, but they like to replace S's with Z's, and that was what they did on the release. So right off the bat, the best score that this album was going to get from me was a 9, because I was not going to give it a 10 because of the ridiculousness of the letter changes, but alas, here we are. The music itself, I'd put it in the symphonic black metal category. I think that kind of encompasses what this is, although I think each of the tracks have their own charm and flavor. And, like I said, it's the first album of the month. We actually had multiple requests for this album. So multiple people on our Patreon wanted to hear this. I'm going to just read a quote by Patreon member Caleb, who wanted to say the following, and I think it's an apt description given what the album is. He says, Nightwork is one of those go-to albums for me that I always want to put on in the middle of winter. It blends a black metal sound with some symphonic keyboards and manages to be eerie/haunting without relying on a, quote, recorded with a tin can in the woods sound that a lot of 90s black metal has. That is very true. On the flip side, it sounds more like raw black metal than some of the other symphonic black metal that's out there. Overall, it's a well-constructed fusion of styles that is short enough not to overstay its welkin. Very, very punny there, I have to say. Good. Any Emperor reference, I'm down. So I thought that was a good synopsis of what this album is, and I agree. It doesn't overstay its welcome. If this album was 70 minutes, heaven help us. And I want to know what your initial impressions were when you first heard this, and kind of your impressions as you made your way through the week.
I don't know that my impressions changed too terribly much, to be honest with you. A little background on this one. We got into a discussion about Dan Swano or Swano. I have no idea how to correctly pronounce his name. And our friend Patrick, who's another member of our Patreon group, really wanted to get us caught up on our knowledge of the one Dan Swano. And so he went about sending us a bunch of different albums that he was a part of, and this happened to be one of the discs that he sent me. And then oddly enough, Caleb, who I've been friends with for many years, and I've mentioned many times on the podcast, when he joined our Patreon and I asked him if he had any requests, this was one of the albums that he mentioned. And like, I literally had the disc sitting on my desk because Patrick had sent it to me. It was like the weirdest thing, like just such a confluence of whatever. And I was like, okay, well, it looks like this one should be an easy one to do since it's just sitting here on my desk. And he also sent me a vinyl copy of Unicorns, A Collection of Worlds Resurrection, which as soon as I get my record player out of storage, I will be listening to that. Yeah, this was, I think, the first of the albums that he sent that I really got to dig into, and I quite liked it. And I think that we've talked about some black metals on the podcast, and this is kind of the type that I am more that I lean more towards enjoying because of the symphonic elements. I've kind of made peace with what the vocals are going to sound like on a black metal album, and if there's other things that are positives for me, I can look past that. The vocals are kind of like scratchy and like harsh sounding and whatever. Like, I could kind of look past that and just enjoy the music for what it is. So at no point was this like a difficult or like unpleasant listening experience for me, even listening, the first time through.
I was not familiar with this album or this band prior to this week. I had never heard of them. I just, for some reason, it had just kind of gone under the radar. I was familiar with Bloodbath and obviously Catatonia, but this band just was never on my radar. And the first, I would say, 3 times that I listened to this album, I was not having any of it, and none of it clicked. And I said, mind you, I listen to black metal. I mean, I talked about the Greya earlier this week, arguably black metal. I've talked about Emperor. I've seen them in concert. I've seen a lot of other black metal bands on 70,000 Tons, and I rather enjoy it. But for some reason, this did not click right away. And sometimes in the past, things have not clicked right away, and then I kind of grew to like it. But this one I actually grew to like a lot. It just took 3 listens before I started to appreciate it. By the 4th listen, I was kind of into it. And I'd say by the 5th or 6th listen, I was actually looking forward to listening to the album. So I've done a real 180 on this one. Is it the best black metal album that I've ever heard? No. But there were elements of this that I really liked a lot. And I thought overall it was impressive enough that I want to kind of go back and listen to some of the other work in the discography. And I agree. It's part of the reason I think I was able to appreciate it more is because it was not overwhelmingly long. Like, I don't need a black metal album to be 76 minutes. That's a little bit much for me. But if you keep it in that 35 to 45 minute range, I think that's like the perfect length for an album like this. And obviously there's symphonic elements, but there's also a lot of cinematic elements to this, which I think kind of separate this from some of the other black metal that's out there. And when I say cinematic, I mean it almost kind of sounds like a movie score in spots, vocals aside. And I think that might have been one of the things that you either gravitated towards or appreciated, because it was not just, blast beats and growls. There was other stuff you could kind of sink your teeth into.
I think that's all very, very fair. And I happen to agree, with all of that. I mean, I heard things that reminded me of Nightwish on here. Like it was, a really nice, I think what Caleb said really kind of was kind of perfectly said. It's kind of a nice, mixture of different sounds, and it all kind of comes together in a nice way. But like, I think the vocals always kind of bring you back to that you're listening to a black metal album at the end of the day. Like that's what kind of, I think, keeps it under that black metal umbrella.
I agree with that, but I also think that the vocals never overpower the overall sound. If it's almost like it accompanies the music rather than, is front and center overshadowing it. So maybe that was part of the allure as well. I don't think the vocals are like the most spectacular thing in the world, but it was an interesting release. And I guess with that, we'll kind of just jump into it. The first track is called Rider on the Bones. And I would say by that fourth listen, this was the track that ironically grabbed me. Last week I talked about with Potter's Field and Anthrax how I thought it was maybe the weakest track on the album, that first track. Here I definitely don't have that opinion. I thought this was one of the best tracks. And for much of the week, it was my song of the week, although I think I'm going to go in a bit of a different direction. The keyboards at the beginning almost make you think that it's going to be a power metal track until you hear the blast beats and that scream, which just kind of recenter the listener. I love the main riff. It permeates the entire song, on and off. I think it's great. It's a rather melodic track. I thought the vocals, especially on this track, had a lot of a King Diamond vibe to it, which I thought was interesting. Not just the raspiness, but then the high notes that are part of this as well. I don't think the vocals are great, but I think that they are certainly theatrical and kind of lend itself to the music. Really heavy song, mid-paced, but it's the guitars on this one that steal the show for me, and I think it's one of the best tracks on the album. Tell me your thoughts. What did you think of this opening track?
It was my favorite song from the start, and it still is. So I'm gonna make it my song of the week, and I really echo pretty much everything you said about it. But I mean, I really love that, just the way that the song starts out with, like you said, like there's that keyboard intro, and then that first like guitar riff, I was just like, hell yeah, man, this is gonna be good. Like I was pumped, and vocals come in, not like a complete turn off for me, honestly. Like I really like this song a lot, and I think it gets towards the middle of the song, you start getting these like, orchestral and symphonic elements with like you said, like kind of this spooky King Diamond kind of like backing vocals. Yesterday was Halloween. This was the perfect album to listen to on Halloween. Just really fit the mood really well. But I really like this song a lot, and it just would be my favorite track each time I went back and listened to the album. So why don't we give it a quick listen, and then we will come back, and I'm very curious to see what you chose. I'm glad that you didn't pick this one, because now we'll have two different choices. But anyway, here is Rider on the Bones by Diabolical Masquerade.
Stay
There's some black metal, especially from the early 90s, that sounds like it was recorded on a Fisher Price record player from 1982 with like no tracks whatsoever. And it's borderline, if not absolutely unlistenable as a result. This is not that. There's actually some decent production on this that you can actually make out the instruments. And given Dan Sueno's involvement, I'm not entirely surprised that's the case, but it makes for a much better experience than some of the contemporaries that were putting out black metal around the same time. Track number 2 is called Dreadventurous. I'm curious if you had similar thoughts about this one. This one kind of starts with an intro that's very like Black Sabbath to me. I thought the riffs especially had this like almost Black Sabbath doom metal vibe with just keyboards behind it. But before I kind of go into the whole song and my thoughts, anything stand out to you about this track?
I mean, when it starts going into like that really creepy piano kind of section, I was really getting Castlevania vibes on this one.
Yes,
like Castlevania goes black metal,
especially during the outro. I was going to say, like, especially the end of this song. 100% agree with you. I had that in my notes. I thought it was rather interesting how similar the vibe was to this and a lot of those Castlevania soundtracks.
I love the way the song ends, like that. Just that whatever that melody is, that kind of leads out the last like 30 to 40 seconds of the track. I think it really just gives it this kind of memorable little flourish right at the end. This was another really good tune. I like this one a lot as well.
I think the vocal effects are a little bit cheesy in spots, but generally speaking, once you get past the effects, I actually preferred the vocals on this track to the first track. There's a lot of background effects. There's bells, there's keyboards, and I think that it just adds another layer to this song, and it almost reminds me of like the Haunted Mansion ride at Disney World, where like the spooky sound effects and whatnot. I think the chorus is a little bit weaker than your song of the week, but I did think it was quite a good song, and it's almost got some prog elements just in the way that there's like pacing and timing changes throughout. A good track, not my favorite, but a good track. And The Skeleton Keys to the Dead is the next one. This one,
I appreciate your just refusal to pronounce the Z's. I'm
gonna no sell it like it's not even there because I feel like I have to.
It's like when a comedian is just like committed to a bit and you're just committed to not doing the bit. I appreciate that.
That's exactly what I'm doing. Great intro to this song. Very melodic. Love the drums. Very tight. This song is really heavy, but it almost has an upbeat feel to it. Yeah, now I know what you're saying, like upbeat black metal. I get it. But the reality is it's not as dark as the prior tunes. And I actually thought that you were going to love this song because I get more of a Children of Bodom vibe on this track than I do Emperor or something like that. Very airy, light keyboards. And I really enjoyed the instrumental section on this one. When I hear songs like this, it really reminds me of another band in the same vein called Carrick Angren. I've talked about them in the podcast. I've seen them live. That will probably be the next black metal band we cover just because A, I like them. B, I think you need to hear them if you can appreciate what this album is. And I also love how there's times where the song just slows down and lets the listener breathe before the onslaught begins again. That's what not only separates this band, but Carrick Angren from some of their others. There's that let up, which allows you to kind of take a breath and then it goes right back into it, which is nice.
Yes, I agree. I didn't like this song as much as the first two, although I will say some of the orchestrations were very Nightwish-esque, I think, at times, and this is just one of those songs and albums where if you took the keyboards out of this, I would not enjoy it nearly as much. I find that the keyboards and the melodies that the keyboards are providing and the orchestrations really kind of push this into a higher echelon of music, of sound, at least for me. And I always talk about how that's kind of like one of one of the driving forces behind like what I find enjoyable about a lot of metal music or even just music in general. And I feel like the keyboards, especially on this album, like really take this from like what would probably be like kind of like a 5, like a kind of average album for me, and make it above average. So I think this song is kind of a good example of that, and it's also a good example of just like you said, how like it kind of changes the vibes like a lot throughout the it's a 5-minute or so song, and like there's parts where it's heavy, there's parts where it's soft, there's like it just really kind of takes you on a journey, I feel like, musically, and then just kind of ends with that ends in like with a real heaviness again, and then it kind of at the very end just kind of does like this kind of like chilled out outro. So still a good song. I didn't like it as much as the first two, but still solid. The Skeleton Keys to the Dead was that last track.
Yeah. Interesting. I thought you'd like it more, but that's okay. We I've been wrong before, known to happen every day. So we're gonna go to this Ultimate Omen. This one doesn't have a light and airy feel to it. This one is dark and brutally heavy, especially with that guttural scream at the very beginning. It's a lot of Dan Swano showing off his drumming chops with the blast beats, and just a really impressive drum performance on this track. I think the riffs are pretty good during the verses. I don't think they're particularly memorable, but the various interludes with the keyboards really help this tune. And like you said, without the keyboards, this is kind of an average album. With the keyboards, it's a very good listen. And there's even a flute passage on this, which I was not expecting. And it reminded me of like a Final Fantasy game that would have been coming out around that time, which we've got Castlevania, we've got Final Fantasy, and we've got black metal. It was a good week by that fourth listen. Your thoughts?
Yeah. I just was thinking Carl, Cat, and James is probably getting a kick out of this right now. Like Final Fantasy and Shadow Gallery just like descending upon this 1998 black metal album that oddly enough came out the same year as Tyranny and Final Fantasy VIII. So lot going on. Some things I was aware of at the time, and other things I was not. But I kind of put this song in the same category as the previous song as well. Like, I liked it, but again, I think those first two tracks kind of set the bar high for me to start out. And I think that if Terrence Holler was going to give this song to you, he would say, "Here's your ghoulish gift." The Ultimate Omen. I'm going to stick with the bit. You can no sell it, but I'm gonna give you the you could be Hulk Hogan. I'm going to be Shawn Michaels on this. I'm going to spell the shit out of it.
Well, what are you, let me ask it this way: the next track's called "All on Board the Perdition Hearse." Hers, you're very cute. Are you buying or selling? Are you on board with this track? I want to hear your thoughts on this fifth track.
Yeah, so I think that after two tracks, I thought were a little bit more mundane compared to the first two. I'm back on with this track. It starts off with just kind of like drums and guitar, and just kind of like, like you're kind of like, where is this headed? It almost sounds like something out of a video game in a lot of ways. And then the drums and the guitars just start to really just start hammering home. And I feel like this song really just comes in really strong. And again, it has kind of that section where things kind of chill out. And it's it leaves you kind of wondering, like, when are things going to get crazy again? Like, how long is this intermission going to last? It's like the opposite of going to a sporting event where they leave a timer up and you know exactly when the intermission is going to end. In this case, it's like you have no idea. It's a surprise. And then the next thing you know, you're getting your face melted off again by, super fast drumming and heavy guitar shredding. And I quite enjoyed this song. Quite a bit, actually, and it's one of my favorites of the 7 tracks. but I do kind of lump this in with the first two as songs that I preferred on the album.
I am right there with you. It, by the last listen, became my song of the week. There was something about this. It was like the right blend of both speed and power, but still had kind of those proggy elements with the changes in dynamics and speed throughout that kind of sold me on this. Again, a video game type of feel to the beginning of this track for sure. Another flute solo, another piano interlude, and just a beautiful end to this song. It was it took a while. It really did, but by the sixth listen, it became my favorite track on the album. So I'm all on board. Let's give it a listen, and we'll come on back and finish this thing up. So that was all on board the Perdition Hearse, and we move to the Dark Circus, the eerie Obsidian Circus to be exact. There's very cheesy narration on this track, but for some reason it kind of lends itself well to what this is. The riff that kind of permeates this thing has a bit of a nu metal vibe, which is kind of ironic because this is kind of when nu metal was starting. And it's kind of hard to bang your head to this because it's all over the place. But in a sense, it actually makes it quite memorable, and it really is aptly named. It's like this really eerie, dark circus, great solos, and I don't know, there's something about this track that really grew on me. At first, I didn't enjoy it, but when you start listening to it, especially with the headphones, the production was in such a way where you kind of swept away by the sound. It's largely instrumental. There's a lot of instrumental passages on this, and I rather liked it by the end. It took a while, but I got there. Circus Maximus, this is not, but I'm curious to hear your thoughts.
There's only one thing that can be said, and that's out of my way, wretched human. So, that intro aside, you know, yeah, how do you recover from that?
They didn't, but can you?
Yeah, I mean, I thought it was good. I actually kind of liked where the circus kind of kicked in, and it just was like everyone just kind of banging on their instruments. It sounded like the end of a Nirvana show where everybody was just like, all right, let's break everything. But I especially like the wild like keyboards at the very end of the song. Like I don't know if it reminded me of like a Haken or just something like where there's like kind of circus-esque keyboards, but the end of the song is really, really kind of cool.
Jordan Rudess would have been proud.
Yeah, it lives up to the circus name, or the circus.
This the album needs to kind of end strong, and I guess the album proper kind of ends with this next track, Haunted by Horror. It's an epic tune, and by epic, I mean it's the longest song on the album. It comes in at just under 7 minutes, and it's really, again, probably the other bright tune on the album. It's not as dark feeling as some of the other stuff. It's very keyboard heavy, and I love the vocals during the verses. I actually think it's really well done. They're simple verses, but they're memorable. There's even acoustic guitar passages, and the main riff itself has a lot of an Opeth vibes to me, like around, this time, Opeth was doing a lot of the more death metal stuff, and this kind of reminded me of that. And there's something about the low end on this track, both the bass and even the drums, that kind of gave off Tool vibes to me, which I thought was weird. So it was like an interesting mix of like Tool, Opeth, and then these keyboards, which kind of added this other dimension to it. Another song that I really enjoyed, especially by the end, and I would say it was up there, probably one of my 3 favorite tracks on the album, and very nearly Song of the Week as well.
Yeah, this reminds me of like the 3 minutes of the day where the sun comes out in the forest in Sweden when they're writing these songs, and they're like, all right, let's put a little bit of positivity and upbeatness to this album. But all kidding aside, I like this one. This is kind of one of my more favorite tracks on the album. I really like the parts where like the music just kind of goes silent and you just hear that eerie little like guitar. I don't know if you want to call it like a riff or whatever, but again, like this really fit the mood of listening to this in like the middle of the fall, and particularly on Halloween yesterday. Just like it really was like feeling the vibes of the holiday by listening to this album. So yeah, this is another good one. I agree with everything that you had to say about it, and I just really enjoyed all the different elements that all just kind of work together to create this album. And I guess I'd be remiss not to mention this kind of weird outro called Crystalline Fiends, not to be confused with Crystalline Dreams, but not really too much to say about this, just a very kind of spooky outro, I think, to just drive home that, in case you forgot, this is a black metal album.
Yeah, it's a bit anticlimactic, but when I found out it was a bonus track, I actually felt better. Had the actual,
I didn't realize that.
Yeah, it's a bonus track on the LP reissue of the album. Had this been the closer, I thought it would have been very underwhelming, because I think that they could have easily ended with Haunted by Horror. But as a bonus track, I have no problem with it. Harpsichord heavy, not bad, just not really necessary. But for a bonus track, throw it on there. I've got no problem. I'm proud of you. You survived your I think 3rd black metal album that we've done on the podcast, 3rd or 4th black metal album. I do think that you might rank this your highest of the 3, though. I'm curious to see what kind of a score you give this thing. So, as always, scale of 1 to 10. What are you giving this?
I am going to give this a 6.875, just a little bit shy of a 7. I just really enjoyed this. Like, I'm never gonna say that black metal is my preferred genre, but if it's done in this way, like I'm on board. I really liked all of the different elements that all kind of combined. I thought as far as black metal vocals go, like these were probably some of the least offensive ones I've heard, or at least like the easier to listen to. So yeah, I toyed with giving it a 7. I don't think it's quite there for me, but it's close. And like I said, I think without those keys, it becomes much more of a mundane, middle of the road kind of average album that I would feel more compelled to give something around a 5. But I think that all the orchestrations and the keys and everything really push this almost like 2 points up for me, to be honest with you. So that's where I'm at on this.
I think that makes sense. I'm close. I'm at a 7. I think it's a very good listen. And again, I wasn't there earlier in the week. Earlier in the week, I probably was somewhere below a 5. I just didn't enjoy it. But by that 4th listen, it clicked, and I enjoyed those last few listens quite a bit. So thanks, Patrick. Thanks, Caleb. And thanks to everyone else for listening. That puts a bow on this week. I want to talk about next week, but there's a couple of news items.
I'm glad you said that. I had a discussion with Steve Scott not too long ago, and he asked me to tell you to start saying, putting a bow on things again. He said that he felt you weren't saying it as much lately, and he
wanted to bring it back for him.
Yeah. So I just wanted to make sure you were aware.
Well, put a bow on it, we will. But a couple of news items. Alice Cooper has announced a series of East Coast dates, starting in Augusta, Georgia at the end of January and running through the middle of February. I bring this up because I was wondering if you've ever seen him live and ever had the privilege of watching his live show, which even after 50 plus years, the man is still quite a performer when he does his thing live.
Yeah, I saw Alice open for Iron Maiden in Buffalo. She's probably 13 or 14 years ago at this point. I think Maiden was doing the Made in England set, and I wasn't expecting much from Alice, and I was actually quite blown away at how good the band was, not just from a musical standpoint, but just all the visuals and the stage antics and like the guillotine and everything. Like it was a real blast. Like just because they were opening for Maiden, they didn't phone it in at all. Like it was a blast. I highly recommend, if anybody hasn't seen Alice Cooper live, just consummate musicians. Alice is a consummate entertainer, and all of it is just a really wonderful package for a live performance.
Yeah, well said. What can I say other than I agree? Just an enjoyable show, and you almost don't realize how many songs you know by him until you go see him live, and you're like, I know more than half the set just because of being exposed to it. It's not just it's not songs that are kind of buried in the discography. He's doing a lot of the greatest hit stuff, but it was a really enjoyable show. And
I was so excited. I was so excited because they played "Feed My Frankenstein," which is a song that I knew well from the Wayne's World soundtrack, and then they played "Poison," which I kind of didn't think they would play, just because I feel like that song kind of gets lumped into the Monsters of Rock compilation CD, like.
Great song, though. It
is a great song. But I was like, oh, maybe like they're trying to stick to like the older stuff, like "School's Out for Summer" and "No More Mr. Nice Guy," which they played both of, but they threw "Poison" in there too, and I was psyched to hear it. That was for a fairly short set. I mean, I knew most of the songs, and they were all songs I really wanted to hear. So yeah, definitely go check them out if you get a chance. Just a
fun fact for you. I saw him on the same tour. He was opening for Iron Maiden. It was at Jones Beach here on Long Island. Brian was always a big fan of Poison, the song, and some of the Alice Cooper stuff. And this was a show that he was supposed to attend, and it was one that he completely forgot about and never made it. So I say that to say, he too would have seen Alice Cooper, but I think he's still sleeping. So we'll put that to bed for now and move on to some Sabotage news. A lot has happened in the world of Sabotage since we last talked about them, specifically being announced for the Monsters of Rock Festival in Sao Paulo, Brazil on April 19th, along with the likes of the Scorpions, Judas Priest, Europe, Queensryche, Opeth, and Stratovarius, which is basically just Justin's lineup. Like, to me, this is like, what a show. I mean, what a lineup. But unfortunately, John Oliva will not be joining the band on stage. The band receives his blessing, if you will, to play, but he's been diagnosed with multiple sclerosis and Meniere's disease and is unable to join them on the road. Bittersweet, to say the least. I toyed with going to this show, but without John there, it just feels like something's going to be missing.
Yeah, I agree. But at the same time, I think that this is pretty much the best possible Sabotage lineup without John being a part of it. It's going to be, Zach Stevens on vocals along with Chris Caffrey and Al Petrelli on guitar, Johnny Lee Middleton on bass, and Jeff Plate on drums. It's basically the Dead Winter Dead / Wake of Magellan lineup minus John.
True.
It's just that, man, like, listen, I'm a huge fan of the Zach era of Sabotage, and if they were going to just come out and play songs from Edge of Thorns, Handful of Rain, Dead Winter Dead, and Wake of Magellan, like, I would be happier than probably most anything else I could have seen. But there's just some of those songs from those John albums, including the final album, Poets and Madmen, that I just would want to hear John sing. So if this is a show that comes to the States in some form or fashion and John's not on it, I will go. If it's in, LA and that's it, if that's where I need to go, I will go to it. I just, I'm just holding out hope that John's going to get a clean bill of health at some point, and maybe in time for, I don't know, maybe around September of 2026, I'm thinking might be a good time for him to kind of feel better and maybe, come out and do maybe one last show with the rest of the guys. I'm sure
you're not kidding.
I'm sure there's a venue and a promoter that would be willing to have them. I'm thinking maybe somewhere in the Southeast United States. But yeah, if nothing else, this at least is signs of life that this band has not shown in quite a long time, minus that one-off show at Wacken. This is a band that's really been on the back burner for most of the last 20 plus years. So, it's good to see their logo on a bill is exciting. And, that's a hell of a lineup. Even without John, it's just to really fulfill that full Sabotage prophecy. We're never going to get to see Chris Oliva, unfortunately, but, I'm just hoping that we haven't seen the last of John on stage, with this band, because it's kind of like the number one thing on my bucket list at this point is I never saw Sabotage with this lineup, and John. I never saw Sabotage with Zach. I never saw Sabotage with Al Pitrelli. So to me, getting to see those five guys that are going to Brazil plus John, that's kind of the ultimate Sabotage lineup, for me. And, I'm just hoping that I can see that lineup, those six guys, just one time before they wrap it up for good. And I'm
hoping they do a private show in the States or some sort of a warm-up gig somewhere. Florida probably being most likely, given that that's where a lot of the band is. But whether it's in New York, the Tampa area, I'm not missing that show. That to me,
if it's in Florida, I will get in the car and drive there.
No questions asked. I can only hope to see the six of them on stage. That would be ideal, but we'll see what happens. But at least it's nice to see them on the bill again. And that brings us to next week. I was thinking about bands and genres, and kind of everything came together when I realized that a band was celebrating an anniversary for an album that came out 15 years ago, November 3rd, 2009. It's a genre we have also not covered a lot on the podcast, transitioning away from the black metal and going towards doom metal, which is something that we have covered, but just not a ton on the podcast. So it's a doom metal band. It is While Heaven Wept, and the album is called Vast Oceans Lacrimose. Came out November 3rd, 2009. I actually had to double check because in my mind I thought we had covered this, but we didn't. And so I think the time is definitely right as they celebrate their 15th anniversary of this album. I have vivid memories of hearing this around the time that it came out, and I'll share that story and more when we talk about it in long form next week.
I really, really, really like this album, and I haven't listened to it in a while, so this is something I'm really looking forward to, and I'm glad you chose it. It's like one of those albums that I think, if not for this podcast, I don't know when I would have gone back and listened to it again. I think I listened to a little bit of While Heaven Wept. They came on board for Prog Power a couple of years ago as a last-minute replacement band, and really put on a hell of a show for being like a last-minute call. And so I think in my prep, I listened to a bit of their stuff, and it kind of just, I was reminded of how much I really enjoy that album. So really awesome choice. I'm looking forward to this. That song Vessel is just like an all-time great tune. So
it definitely is, but I gotta be honest, the rest of the album is right there with it. And I love that song. It's an all-time favorite of mine, but the whole album kicks ass. I was listening to it earlier today, and I'm like, damn, I forgot how good this was. But I'm not going to just completely gush over it. There's reasons, specific reasons why I just love this album, and we'll talk about that and all things.
I can't believe it's been 15 years. That's crazy.
That is the frightening part of this whole thing, but no better time than next week to talk about them as we celebrate the anniversary. I want to just give a shout out to all of our Patreon members. As I've said, you are the lifeblood of this podcast, and we appreciate you. To everyone else that's either listening for the first time or longtime listeners, thank you. Please give us a like and a follow. Join the chat over on our shows, on our socials. Lots of interesting discussions there. And look forward to coming back next week with some doom metal from the United States, which is not known particularly for their doom metal, but this band seems to transcend all boundaries.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Enjoy the week, my friend, and I will talk to you soon.
All right, take care, buddy.